Hello and welcome. So glad you could tune in today. I am Stephanie Nicholls. I'm the training manager for Michigan Alliance for Families. And today we're going to be talking about one part of the IEP, which is goals, objectives, and progress monitoring. This is one video in a series of videos on the big parts of the IEP. I encourage you to tune in to present level of academic achievement and functional performance and supplementary aids and services to get pictures of all those three big parts of the IEP, and they all fit together. That should give you a good picture to have some great questions for your parent mentor or your IEP team. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the big picture about special education and then narrow in on goals, objectives, and progress monitoring today. A little bit more about Michigan Alliance for Families. We are grant funded and totally free across the state of Michigan. We have regional parent mentors that live where they serve. They all have a loved one who either currently receives or previously received special education supports and services. They are there to share their knowledge and experience and expertise and information with other families so that we're not all reinventing the wheel. So we are here to provide parent training and information for families that have a student that currently receives or might be eligible to receive special education supports and services. And our goal is to help families be more involved in their students' education and to lead to better outcomes and more success for your students. So thank you for joining us. Please feel free to check out more information on our website, MichiganAllianceForFamilies.org, and you can also find your parent mentor to connect with there. A quick snapshot of the topics we're going to cover today. We want to start with that big picture of where this is coming from, which is IDEA, that federal law. And that federal law says individualized education programs are what are used, what the tool is to offer a free and appropriate public education. So we're going to talk a little bit about the IEP in general, and then we're going to dive into today's topic, which is goals and objectives, and then how to monitor progress and what that looks like, how you can be involved in that, what questions to ask your team. Let's go ahead and get started. So whenever we start talking about the IEP or a part of the IEP, I think it's important that everybody understands where this is coming from and why it's important. So our big federal law is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. And that's the law that makes a free and appropriate public education available to eligible children with disabilities throughout the country and ensures special education and related services to those children. FAPE, free and appropriate public education, is a huge concept to wrap your head around of what that looks like and what students are entitled to who receive special education supports and services. That is another great thing to look up on our website or Google and really dig into what FAPE means, what a free and appropriate public education is. This is a part of, a foundational piece of the federal law. Congress reauthorized this federal law, IDEA, in 2004 and recently amended it through the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. Congress states in this law that disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the rights of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. I think keeping this in mind when you're thinking about what your student needs and what needs to be included in their individualized education program is helpful for framing our thinking, that we want to ensure equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. That's our long-term goal. So IDEA lays out these foundational pieces, that eligible children with disabilities are entitled to free and appropriate public education, that emphasize special education and related services designed to meet the child's unique needs and prepare the child for further education, employment, and independent living. So FAPE, free and appropriate public education, is an entitlement for every eligible child with a disability. And that includes special education and related services designed to meet the child's unique needs. So the individualized education program is the primary vehicle to provide the free and appropriate public education. And that individualized program needs to be unique to your student to prepare them in the long term for further education, employment, and independent living. You heard me say unique. You heard me say individualized. You know that this IEP needs to be tailored to your child and your child's needs. We've covered that. I will probably say it 30 more times because it is so important. But we need to think about what the IEP covers. What areas of the day? What are we thinking about when we're writing the IEP? I think we all start with this academic piece, that we know the classroom, the IEP applies in the classroom. The reading, writing, math, history, those core courses that we all remember from school are where we start thinking about how our IEP can support the student. One of the nice things in Michigan is that we have one curriculum in Michigan, and it defines the scope and sequence of learning. So we know that step 1 comes before step 2, before step 3, that in each area there are curriculum guides that lay out that sequence. So you know that if you're learning 2-digit addition right now, the next thing you're going to be learning is 2-digit subtraction. It is very straightforward, and you can look at where the student is to see what the next skill is. So that is something that's very helpful when we're defining how we're looking at the student's learning in the individualized education program. PE, music, art, computer science, health, world languages all have those same scope and sequence of learning curriculums. You could Google Michigan academic standards to get more information about the specifics of any of those areas. So those are all defined, and those need to be included in the IEP of how the student is going to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. We also want to think about non-academic times during the day and during the school year. So that may be transportation, lunch, recess, field trips. There's all sorts of different times of the day that may need support that are not while you're sitting in the classroom or not while you're doing group work in the classroom. I don't want to pretend our kids sit in the classroom all day. I hope they don't. I hope they're active and involved in their learning. But there could be all sorts of needs in these non-academic parts of the day. A lot of times we see behavior supports are needed in the less structured parts of the day. That if we are seeing behaviors on the bus, we need support on the bus. We need to talk about what a behavior intervention plan may look like that includes the bus, because that is a part of what is covered by the IEP. We also want to talk about extracurricular. So these are the activities that are provided by the school. There may still be costs to participate if there is a pay-to-play fee for sports. The IEP including the extracurriculars does not mean that you're not paying to play. If there is a tryout for sports, the IEP including extracurriculars does not mean that you're not trying out for that sport. What it does mean is that the supports and services that the student needs are available to them to try out for the sport. And if it's a club that everyone is welcome at, that means the supports and services that the student needs go with them to that club. So these are all 3 areas throughout the day, throughout the educational experience that should be considered in the IEP. So we're talking about academic, non-academic, and extracurriculars. We've talked about IDEA and that it defines the individualized education program as the vehicle that delivers a free and appropriate public education to individuals with disabilities. We've talked about that the IEP applies in academic, non-academic, and extracurricular environments. I briefly want to touch on this Supreme Court case, Endrew F versus Douglas County School District. There's lots of information about this case. I think it's interesting to read the background and read more about the case, but we're just going to touch on it briefly today. Endrew F is what you would want to search for if you were looking for more information. It was a 2017 unanimous decision, so everyone agreed. And the finding said that to meet its substantive obligation under the IDEA, a school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. That every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. So what does that mean? It means that in order to meet the obligation of a free and appropriate public education, FAPE, the school district had to show that the IEP is designed to provide the child with a disability with more than trivial or minor educational benefits. So that every child should have goals and objectives that are challenging and achievable for them to make progress in light of the child's circumstances. All right, so we touched on Endrew, and you can Google that for more information. Let's flip back a little bit to IDEA and what it says about goals, because it is, again, a requirement within the federal law where it defines what the individualized education program. It has to include a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals that are designed to meet the child's needs that result from the disability, to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, and meet each of the child's other educational needs that result from the child's disability. When it's talking about being involved in and making progress in the general education curriculum, it is talking about doing that in the least restrictive environment with non-disabled peers as much as possible. But when I was talking about that Michigan curriculum that follows the steps, that means the child's next goal is going to be the next step in their learning. So this is really going to be based on that present level of academic achievement and functional performance. That we need to have that data about where the child is at right now to figure out what's next. And the goals and objectives should be written to address those needs. It also does state in IDEA that for children with disabilities to take alternate assessments, and that's My Access in Michigan, then the content and learning is aligned to the alternative academic achievement standards, and a description of benchmarks or short-term objectives need to be included. So if your student is taking an alternate assessment, the goals may be tied to the alternate academic achievement standards as opposed to the main curriculum. But they have to be measurable annual goals that look at academic and functional. So any child's needs that result from the disability. So we want to think about all of those needs that are in that present level, which go ahead and jump back to that video and get some more information on present level there if needed. But that present level is going to drive what the goals are. This video is to help you learn more about goals and objectives and progress monitoring, and those are together because we can't really talk about one without the other. And IDEA reflects that same concept, that you can't have goals unless you are measuring the child's progress. So in IDEA, it does say that you have to have a description of how the child's progress toward meeting the annual goals will be measured, and when periodic reports on progress the child is making toward meeting the annual goals will be provided. Oftentimes we see those periodic reports on the marking period. That is absolutely an option, and that's an example given here in IDEA. But that is something that is an IEP team decision of the frequency of that monitoring and how often those periodic reports need to be issued. Okay, I think that was a lot of front-end information, so we have an idea of why we're talking about goals and objectives and progress monitoring, why they're a part of an IEP, where they're coming from, and how they should be challenging to your students' learning. And they should be looking at what the next steps are based on what we already have documented in the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Then we want to look at the needs and then figure out what's next and how we're going to get there, what we want to measure, how it's going. So let's define our terms. We're talking about goals and objectives, and they're usually referenced together, but they're not the same thing. So IEP goals are annual targets of specific skills or behavior the student will master in 1 year's time. That is the annual goal. The objectives are benchmarks or short-term steps to reach the annual goal. So, for example, if Elijah's present level of academic achievement and functional performance tells us that he can identify numbers from 1 to 100 and count by tens and tell time on a digital clock, the annual goal for the upcoming year could be around telling time on an analog clock with 90% accuracy on classwork and teacher observation. That's the big goal, the annual goal, that specific skill that's going to be taught. The objectives could be telling time to the hour, telling time to the half hour, telling time to the quarter hour, counting by fives, because if I can't tell time if I can't count by fives on an analog clock. I need to know what the 5 hand means when the big hand's pointing at it. That has to do with that foundational skill of counting by fives. Then, once I know how to count by fives, I could tell time to 5-minute intervals. I could tell time to 1-minute intervals once I can count by 5 and use my math skills to go up or down from there. The objectives are the steps that are needed to reach the goal. So all of those pieces could be needed objectives for Elijah to be able to tell time with 90% accuracy on an analog clock based on classwork and teacher observation. So the goal is the skill that's going to be taught in the annual year, skill or behavior. The objective is the steps, the short-term goals that we need to get there. A lot of times, you're going to see goals and objectives where the goal is 90% and the objectives are throughout the year. We're going to hit 60%, 80%, 90% so that we're increasing the accuracy of the response. That's not the only way to do it. So those foundational skills, those steps, are also another method of defining objectives. Well-written goals should be based on information from the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. If those are new words, there's another video called the PLAF that I encourage you to check out. One of the big things that I want you to always remember about the PLAF is that it's the foundation for the whole IEP. So anything in the goals or in the accommodations or modifications or the services should tie back to the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So when we're thinking about well-written goals, when we're trying to define goals, we need to look at where the student is currently to see where they're headed. What can the student currently do? What is challenging yet attainable for the year ahead? Do we have data on what the learning looked like last year or what the progress looked like last year? We want to look at that data to drive what an appropriate goal is that's attainable for an annual goal. The well-written goal should be positive and should describe a skill or behavior that can be seen and measured. So I want to say that again. It should describe a skill or behavior that can be seen and measured. So the annual goals need to be something you can have data on, where you can see it, count it, measure it, and then look at the progress. And we're going to talk more about why that's relevant when we're talking about progress monitoring. But it needs to be something that any casual observer can see and measure. Annual goals are kind of like a roadmap. Where's the child headed this year? What is he or she going to work on? And we want to look, again, academically and functional development. A goal does not need to be tied just to the curriculum. It needs to be tied to the individual student's needs created by the disability. Admirable outcomes are not IEP goals. Goals cannot be based on attitudes, intentions, or states of being. You can't measure an attitude. An attitude is a state of mind that exists within the person, and it's something that you or I, any observable outsider, can't decide what that means or what that looks like. That we need IEP goals to be specific and measurable. One other thing I want you to think about when you're reading an IEP goal is the dead man's test. Can a dead man do it? If the answer is yes, there isn't a skill or behavior being taught. It's passive. There's no action from the student. So, will not disrupt class is an example of a dead man's goal. That's not a goal we want to have on the table. It's also a negative goal. This isn't from a positive voice. That isn't what the student will learn or what the student will do. That is a negative, will not disrupt class. I think the tricky part with a lot of these admirable outcomes is that the IEP team can agree. That we can all say, yes, we want the student to develop a love of reading and we want them to commit to academic success. But these are not measurable academic or functional goals. These are concepts, and we need to have concrete academic or functional goals that can be measured. So what should goals say? I mean, really, they should answer all of these questions. And moving through this list in your head can be helpful when you're looking at a goal to see, does it answer these? Where do I need clarification? What are the additional questions? So who will achieve the goal? Typically, it's going to be your child, the individual that the plan is written for. There are those hopefully rare instances where you see another name or you see the student is listed in the IEP, I think that's a really important time to pause and talk with your team about the program and if it's tailored to your individual child. Um, really how it's tying back to the present level, how it is relevant to your child. We want to look at what skill or behavior is being taught. Define it. What does it look like? I see a lot of IEPs that have reference to paragraph structures or writing examples or visual supports that are not defined within the goal. You want to know that you would be able to measure the goal if you were watching the child working on the skill or behavior. So what does that look like? We want to know how it's being measured, in what manner or at what level. So what is the target? What the annual goal defines how we're going to measure it and what the target is, where, in what setting or under what conditions. Is this one-on-one with the speech therapist? Is this with peers? Is this in class? Is it push-in? Is it in the hallway? Is it pull out? Is it in the office? Is it in the lunchroom? Is it in all settings? How is it being measured in all settings? Who is measuring it? And also when, by what time, by what ending date. And for the annual goals, that's usually going to be a calendar year from when we're writing the goal. But for the objectives, there may be those steps along the way throughout the year. So this is one way to think about what goals should do. Another way to think about goals is with this acronym SMART. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, and use action words, realistic and relevant, and time specific. So when we're talking about specific, we're talking about exactly what you want to accomplish. And this circles back to where our goal can't be to be kind. The goal needs to be specific about what skill or behavior is going to be taught. It needs to be measurable, something you can count or observe, that you know what it looks like and you would be able to measure it. If you cannot measure it the way it is written, those are questions for the team that you would want to be able to collect data at home. And I think a lot of us discovered this when COVID hit and virtual learning hit and we were seeing more of what it looked like and we didn't know how to measure that data. And those were a lot of good conversations and a lot of hard conversations at that point. So the data that needs to be written so that it is measurable, where we can see progress. It needs to be attainable. Choose a goal that can be reached and use action words that tell what the student will be able to do. We want to look at the student's history to be able to talk about what is attainable within a year. If the target that is chosen, the IEP team can't explain or can't answer to why they think that is achievable in a year or what that is based on, the team may need to go back to the PLAF and look at the data to see what that looks like. Realistic and relevant. This is tough because you want to make sure the goals that they're working on are things that are meaningful to your child. I mean, one thing that I think is often really helpful is as a family or as parents thinking about what your long-term goals are for your kids, what their needs are right now, and then using that to talk with the team and share that with the team and talk about what may be a relevant annual goal based on what the long-term goals are. The goals need to be meaningful to the individual student. Taking Liam's goal and giving it to Anna is not going to be valuable. That Liam's goals are realistic and relevant to him. They also need to be time specific. How long will it take to reach the goal? And when will progress be monitored? How is it going to be measured? Time specific, it's usually going to be an annual goal. And then it needs to say within the goal how often progress is going to be reported. All right, let's dive into progress monitoring. Are you ready? Whew. Progress monitoring is throughout the year, looking at how things are going toward that annual goal. That annual goal needs to clearly define what the criteria is of what skill or behavior is being taught and to what level. That measured level is the annual target. And that is if the goal will be met, how it's going to be measured, what the targeted outcome is. That target is meaningless without knowing the starting point or baseline data. What you see on the screen is a graph that represents how you could look at that data. So we know where we're starting, September when we're writing the IEP, and we know what the goal is a year from now, next September, when we'll be having our next annual IEP meeting. When you are in an IEP team meeting and discussing and developing this goal with the other members of the team, you want this goal to tie back to data we already have, information we already have from the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. The way that data is collected from the PLAF may not be the same as how the goal is written. How the goal is written to be measured is how you want your baseline data captured. So there may need to be a point where, as a team, you decide we need to pause and not finalize the IEP, not start the program yet until we have baseline data that is measured the way the goal is written to be measured, so that you are comparing apples to apples as you are getting progress reports and when we're looking at the goal. Why does the baseline data matter? I have two lines on the screen now. We added a red line. The red line is if the student, we're going to say her name is Luna. Luna can do the skill 50% of the time, and the goal is for her to do it 90% of the time by the end of the year, is the red line. The purple line, Luna can only do it 10% of the time, and the goal is still for her to do it 90% of the time by the end of the year. Either of these could be completely appropriate goals depending on her present level and what the skill is and where we're headed. So we receive a periodic report about the IEP goal, and it says in January, Luna is doing this 40% of the time. Depending on the baseline data, this tells us very different things. So if she was doing it 10% of the time at the beginning of the year, she is absolutely right on that trend line, on track to hit her annual goal of 90% by the end of the year. But if she was doing it 50% of the time at the beginning of the year, she has lost skill. She has regressed. This is going poorly. This strategy is not working. We need to look at something else. And if we went from 50% to 40%, that would be an appropriate time to reach out to your IEP team and say, we really need to talk about this. We're not on track to meet the goal. Do we need to try a different approach? Do we need to try a different strategy? What do we need to change? This clearly isn't working. And we don't want to wait for the whole year to pass before we see that. So without the baseline data, the progress report doesn't have the same value. We talked about a lot of different information about goals and objectives today. We talked about how it's rooted in IDEA within the individualized education program. And then we talked about different ways to look at it. Your big takeaways for today, I want you to be thinking about those WH questions, making sure you can answer all those questions when you're reading through a goal or discussing those with the other members of the team if you can't answer them. I want you to think about that SMART acronym: specific, measurable, achievable or attainable, realistic and relevant, and timely. All goals should meet all of those. And then I want you to think about the importance of baseline data and progress monitoring, that we want to see if the child is learning the skill or behavior being taught, if we're headed towards achieving that goal, or if we need to make changes, we want to do that sooner than later. Let's take this thinking about goals and objectives and think about how it fits into the whole IEP process. So the present level of academic achievement and functional performance is the foundation of the IEP. That is where we are capturing the student's needs and current data. Those needs and data are going to drive the goals and objectives, the skills or behavior the child will learn. We need that foundational piece from the present level before we can talk about the goals and objectives. Sometimes teachers like to start at goals and objectives because that's where they're headed, that's what they're going to teach. If that happens, I would really circle backward to make sure the conversation is starting with capturing that current picture, because figuring out where we're going if we don't know where we're coming from doesn't have value. We want to start with what the student needs are. That is going to drive what the goals and objectives are. Once we've defined where we're headed, we can talk about assuring access and accommodations and modifications. And with all of that, then we can add in our programs and services, what those special education services and programs look like. Those together with all of those parts provide a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Sometimes IEP meetings can jump in at different spots. As parents, sometimes we want to talk about how many speech sessions we want. Like I said, teachers sometimes want to talk about what we're going to learn next. Jumping in at any of those points can lead us to circular conversations. This is honestly a linear process. You need to start with the student needs and where they're at right now to move on to the other pieces. If we are finding we're kind of spinning our wheels in a meeting, I would encourage you to move back to the PLAF statement and defining the student needs. I mean, one of the things that's really nice about starting with PLAF is that everyone is on the same page, that we're making our decisions based on that data, and we all have that shared goal for success of the student. So we do have a video on present level, and we have a video on accommodations, modifications, programs, and services. So if you're looking for more information on those areas, please feel free to check those out also. Some questions to consider as we're wrapping up today. When we're thinking about goals, are the skill, behavior, conditions, and criteria clearly defined? Do we know what it looks like? Can we count it, see it, and measure it? Do you have baseline data? And who is collecting the data and when will it be shared? I mean, one thing that's often tricky, especially with behavior goals, is that we want the data collected across environments. So who is across environments and how is that data being collected? Is there a way for the lunchroom monitor to report data back that's included when we're looking at how that progress is being monitored? So who is collecting it and when is it being shared with the team? Way to go! Now you know more about goals, objectives, and progress monitoring. I'm glad you tuned in today. I hope this information was useful. Please don't hesitate to reach out to your regional parent mentor for more information and answers to your specific questions. Also, feel free to follow us on Facebook or Twitter and check out the other videos on the YouTube channel. You can reach your parent mentor at 800-552-4821 or by email at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Thank you for coming. Have a great day. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs.